Welcome to Fertility and Sterility on Air, the podcast where you can stay current on the latest global research in the field of reproductive medicine. This podcast brings you an overview of this month's journal, in-depth discussion with authors, and other special features. F&S on Air is brought to you by the Fertility and Sterility family of journals in conjunction with the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, and is hosted by Dr. Kurt Barnhart, new media and video editor, Dr. Eve Feinberg, associate editor, and Dr. Micah Hill, interactive associate-in-chief.
Hello, everybody. It's Kurt Barnhart again, the media editor for Fertility and Sterility. I'm here with a special edition of F&S on Air. We're going to talk about the Fertility and Sterility family of journals. Fertility and Sterility is an international journal for obstetricians, gynecologists, reproductive endocrinologists, urologists, basic science, and others who treat and investigate infertility and human reproductive disorders. We want to explain these family journals to you and hopefully have you understand the literature in it, add to the literature in it, and help us review the literature that will go into it. So it's a privilege to have the editors-in-chief for Fertility and Sterility on the call with us. I'll start with Craig Niederberger. Craig, what do you think has contributed to the success of Fertility and Sterility?
It's not us. It's everybody that we've worked with over the years. Our editorial editors are spectacular in coming up with editorial content describing the import of various trends in the field. Our associate editors are the backbone of peer review, and they're extraordinary. Our media editor is extraordinary, and everybody that works to peer review our articles, to submit their great work to Fertility and Sterility. This is really the if we've had success, this is really the reason for any success. Is really the people that we work with. Tony, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, I concur with you. And I would like to add the fact that from the very beginning, we understood that we should bring something new and especially take advantage of the new technologies that were already available. But most or basically all the scientific journals were published in the classic way, basically in paper, printed versions, etc. So we introduced for the first time the dialogue and got rid of the classical letters to the editor. We introduced the journal club for a scientific journal, and also the video articles that are considered like and are peer-reviewed and treated in the journal like original articles. So these three innovations were developed over the years, and today are a substantial part of the journal.
Hi, Craig and Tony. It's Eve Feinberg. As you know, I'm one of the associate editors for F&S, and really appreciate having you both on this podcast and talking about the journal. I think what's so interesting to understand, and I think, Craig, you've spoken on this before, is what is the flow of an article? So as an author, when you submit your manuscript, I know as an associate editor where those manuscripts land and how they land on my desk, but can you walk our listeners through the process from submission to how that article trickles through the editors to the associate editors to the reviewers, and just shed some light on what often seems to be a blind process?
Sure. Hopefully it's not a trickle. Speaking as a urologist, hopefully it's not a trickle. So a author will submit an original contribution. So this is not talking about our editorial content. We have editorial editors that generate our editorial content, for example, Views and Reviews and the Fertile Battle and things like that. That starts with the editorial editors, and then those authors are selected by the editorial editors after discussion amongst ourselves for an original contribution. That then is submitted online to the journal office. And Tony and I have a fairly light touch around that. If there are some problems with the manuscript. For example, it was retrospectively entered into a clinical trials database, that sort of thing. Even if it's like really wonderful, but if it goes against those kinds of rules, and those rules are really important for the ethical conduct of research in our field, then we'll pull it out. But typically, we'll make a decision about whether or not it should go into peer review. And then when it goes into peer review, then based on the subject material, it'll go to an associate editor who is an expert in that field. And that's really important because your article is going to be reviewed by someone who has a deep understanding of the field. And that associate editor will then choose reviewers if the associate editor feels that it should go through the peer review pathway. One reviewer needs to be from our editorial board of 100 or so reviewers that are on the board because we feel that they're extraordinary analytical minds in the field. And then the other reviewer can be ad hoc, not necessarily has to be ad hoc, but can be ad hoc, chosen for their expertise in that particular area for that particular paper. And then there are other reviewers that it can be brought in, but that's the minimum. And so then the reviewers will work with the author on making the manuscript better. So if it is decided that that manuscript will then progress towards publication, then the reviewers will take a very deep dive with the author, and typically 2 or 3 revisions are necessary. And the idea there is that we want to take a great paper and make it even greater. And then ultimately it will go on to publication. So curious, Tony, do you have anything to add to that?
No, basically that our acceptance rate is now around 12%. And most of the papers, because they have such a great quality, are usually accompanied by what we call reflections. That is basically an editorial where some experts in the field make interesting points. So, and altogether, to our understanding, makes a beautiful issue, a beautiful publication where you can see the original manuscript, but also the particular comments and particular points, sometimes nice criticism about the publication.
Craig and Tony, can you give us an idea of the volume, how many articles run through and how many are in the journal? And is this a moderate journal or a big journal compared to that kind of volume?
Yeah, roughly speaking, I think we receive around 200, 250 per month. And we publish exactly 20 to 25 per issue.
Thank you, Craig and Tony. So this is Mike Hill, the Interactive Associate-in-Chief, and we're very fortunate to not just have 2 editors-in-chief on this call, but to have 5 with our 3 sister journals as well. So Ann Steiner, Bill Cathrino, and Rick Paulson, we would just love to hear from you about your new journals and what you want our listeners to know about your journal. Ann, let's start with you.
Well, I am the editor-in-chief for F&S Reviews, and we are very excited to have not only people submitting wonderful review articles to F&S Reviews, but also distributing these excellent review articles to our readership. We'd really like to be a resource for clinicians, scientists, and trainees by publishing really quality, comprehensive, and impartial review articles that advance a reader's understanding of a facet of reproduction. And I'll leave it from there.
Thank you, Ann. Bill, tell us about your journal.
Fantastic. So F&S Science is pretty much what you'd expect it to be. We're where the science starts. We are the area where basic science and early translational work is compilated and stored so that we can form models that inform us as far as how we're going to improve clinical care. So those of you who are doing straight basic science research, this is your home. F&S Science is a place you want to publish. For those of you who are looking at, for example, oocyte quality or something that is related to a more basic sciencey topic, not so much live births, but those that are related to ways in which we can improve our current care that is more bench type associated work, and even areas outside of bench research, but things that are going to change the way we approach reproductive medicine. That's what we're looking for. We can talk a little bit later, but so far we've been quite successful, and we continue to progress, and we're looking forward to your submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And Rick, tell us about your journal.
So FNS Reports really reminds me of fertility and sterility of yesterday. I started with fertility and sterility on the editorial advisory board, as it was called that, back in 1998. And FNS used to get about 60 submissions a month, and we accepted about a third. And I will tell you that FNS Reports accepts about a third of our submissions now, of which there are just north of about 20 a month. And the reason that this journal came to be, you just heard. You just heard that fertility and sterility has a 12% acceptance rate. That's a lot of really good science that has to be turned down because it's not perfect, because it doesn't have the perfect controls, because it's perhaps a retrospective study design. And those are the kinds of studies that we are looking for in FNS Reports. The other part of starting this journal was the opportunity for innovation. And I've always liked case reports. I recognize the fact that Louise Brown was a case report. The first successful ICSI is a case report. All of these things, I think, are potentially very interesting. We've had some wonderful case reports. The one I liked in our first issue was from Alex Quas and the group down at UC San Diego, evidence of profound ovarian suppression. A patient who comes in for fertility preservation who'd been on birth control pills for a long time, who's essentially in ovarian failure, and 6 months later, they're collecting 20 plus eggs from her. This is very interesting. I've never seen that. I'm happy to have been able to put that into FNS Reports. And just before this podcast, I did this ultrasound on a pregnant patient that I really couldn't understand. And it just so happens that last week I got a submission of a molar pregnancy after the transfer of a euploid blastocyst. So I don't know how that's going to turn out in the reviews, but was that it? Am I looking at a molar pregnancy? The entire time I'm looking at this ultrasound, I'm asking myself, I wonder if that's what it is. So I'll keep you posted. I'll bring her back in a week and see what we get. And in the meanwhile, we'll get a HCG value and see where that takes us. But I think there's great value in those kinds of case reports and even relatively small case series, as well as, of course, filling in the parts of the science with retrospective analyses and looking at people's experiences. So we're there for all of these reasons. The open access format, of course, makes it very easy to access these articles because you never have to download them. They're only as far as your phone and or your tablet or wherever you are, and there's all of your manuscripts. So FNS Reports is a new journal which is a lot briefer than its editor-in-chief, who seems to go on and on. But that's just because I'm so excited about the journal.
Dr. Paulson, I suggest you publish your work in FNS Reports.
That's a great idea, Bill. Thank you.
So clearly, I see there's a trend in publishing to have a family of journals. Lancet has a family of journals. Human Reproduction has a family of journals, and now Fertility and Sterility has a family of journals. No question that you can identify which journal your work best fits into, but isn't there some sort of cascade? In other words, if you put your journal to FNS, would it be considered for the other journals?
That's a great question. We often, and Rick really identified something that perplexed us for a long time before we had our wonderful sister journals, and that was that we were turning away really good work that didn't just quite fit in fertility and sterility. So if we find something that we think is of value, then we will share it with the editors of our sister journals to see if they're interested. And if that's the case, then we will communicate with the author. Perhaps you should consider this journal because it might be a wonderful home for that paper.
One important point, though, is that these aren't journals that are meant to pick up papers that are not of poor quality. We give them the same rigorous review that they would get through F&S. And the fact is, you can be proud to publish in any one of these journals because the quality is still going to be very high. It's that we needed more space to publish the excellent work that exists, not that we have papers that are not of high quality that we're going to publish in these journals. We want to make sure that you can be proud to publish in any one of them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bill. So I just want the listeners to be clear on this. So when I'm reviewing a paper as an associate editor, and if I think, gee, this is an amazing case report, but it's not really well suited for F&S, then often what I will do is I will send a note to Rick and say, hey, this might be better suited for F&S reports. And then I guess, Rick, what I'd love to know is on the back end, how does that then get translated to the author? And if the author gets a notice back stating, consider this for F&S reports, is that like a clue that there's been some back talk and communication and that they may have a higher likelihood of making it successfully through the editorial process if they get that clue on consider F&S reports?
I would say definitely. And I think that's primarily because of people like you, Eve, who really choose the good articles to send to us. So the vast majority of the articles that cascade to us are, in fact, of that category. And if I get it back and it's already a first revision based on the reviews that came from Fertility and Sterility, we'll just look it over. And if the associate editor and I agree that that has been peer reviewed and it's good enough, it can just go in. Often, obviously, we'll find another typo someplace in paragraph 14 that we would like to have fixed. But other than that, it should go in, and they do clearly have a higher acceptance rate because someone has already looked at them and thought this is probably worthwhile. So thanks for bringing that up. That's a very good point.
So the one journal that perhaps doesn't cascade directly to is Reviews, because, Anne, isn't your journal a little bit different than the other fertility and sterility journals?
Yes, we're publishing review articles, and in general, we ask for most of our authors to provide a proposal prior to completing their review. The goal of this proposal is to make sure that it would be appropriate for F&S reviews in our readership, and to make sure that if there are any issues that can be identified before the review is conducted, and hopefully improve the quality and the strength of the review. So that by the time the author has submitted the actual review article, we know that it will likely be accepted into F&S reviews. I encourage anybody interested in submitting to F&S reviews to go to our website, FertSturt Reviews, and look at what we're interested in, which are both systematic and comprehensive reviews on a specific topic. Of course, what people kind of wonder, what exactly are we looking for? And what I would say is, one, it needs to be novel, or there needs to be a justification for review. For example, we're not really looking for a review article on a semen analysis, but we might be interested in novel topics for assessing sperm quality. We also want it to be impartial and balanced and focused and in depth. So in other words, we don't want it to be on endometriosis and not on IL-6-174GC polymorphism and endometriosis, but potentially on the inheritability and potential genetic or epigenetic pathophysiology of endometriosis. We'd like, of course, to be logical, structured, and clearly written, because we want our readership to be able to read this in one sitting and find it easy to understand. And of course, it must be up to date. As I mentioned, I encourage anybody interested in drafting a review article and submitting to F&S Reviews to go to our website and to look first at drafting one of these proposals, pulling together a proposal, and sending it in to us for kind of a quick once over, and we will provide feedback to you and let you know whether or not you should move forward. But I'll leave it from there in case anybody else has any topics or would like to discuss more about their journals.
I just wanted to highlight one of Anne's points, which I think is really important. A lot of potential submitters of articles might worry that, well, gosh, these journals are new, and should I be submitting to them? And, are people publishing them? I encourage you, if that's the case, to go to our websites, look at our papers, evaluate, is your paper ideally suited for this journal? We have been successful. We have published manuscripts, and now you can evaluate them, and you can see whether this is the right journal for you and whether the quality fits the type of quality of manuscript that you'd like to submit. And I encourage you to do that, and I think you'll be excited by just going to the websites, and they're all the same: Fertile Sterile Science, Fertile Sterile Reports, Fertile Sterile Reviews.org for all three. Go to any one of them or to all of them, look at the articles, and I think you'll be very proud of what all of us together, you and all of us, have accomplished.
So earlier this morning, Kurt, Eve, and I did the F&S On Air podcast recording, and one of the articles was talking about research integrity and the quality of the literature and how it maybe differs in reproductive journals compared to the top journals in medicine. So this is sort of a high-level question. I know as a reviewer and as a researcher what we can do to try to tackle that, but as editors-in-chiefs, how do you view that? How do you improve that? What is F&S doing?
Start by the fact that there is obligation to register the clinical trials. And that was, I think it was implemented in 2007, if my memory is correct. And basically when we started in the journal, we implemented it immediately. So from the very beginning, as compared to our main competitors in the field. And this is one of the main points that we always look at. Registration, IRB approval, etc. Then if we identify any type of misconduct, we notify the publications committee of ASRM. So we as editors don't deal with misconduct, but it obviously is our duty to identify any type of misconduct. And it's also important to understand that we have very good relationships with our competitors, and we, before the pandemic, of course, we used to meet twice a year, once at ESHRE in July and the other one at the ASRM. And with all the confidentiality and privacy, but we exchange information, and we were able to identify, let's say, hot points, hot problems, and perhaps some places where papers were published with perhaps some issues regarding scientific integrity. So we and others are doing our best to get rid of all the scientific misconduct.
Yes, we can also point out that fortunately within the F&S group, we also work with ASRM and have the publications committee. And the publications committee has worked hard to identify and follow up on any issues that can come up with regard to scientific misconduct or any other issues. So we actually focus on trying to be sure that the articles that are published are articles that the readership can count on, and that those who publish in it can feel comfortable that their articles are of high quality and surrounded by other articles that are high quality and high ethical quality as well.
So I would attack sort of the part of the question that says, what can you do as editor-in-chief? And I would say that still the biggest errors or misconduct, if you will, in the conduct of science, I think is done out of ignorance. And that is that the conclusion is not supported by the data. And often the data are in there, and as you read it, you can actually make a conclusion. It just happens to be different from the conclusion that the authors put down as their primary endpoint. And this, I think, is where the editorial process can and should help. All of us get enthusiastic about our latest hypothesis. I know that I do. It's very easy to get swept along and say, look at that. Oh, I know this is true. And here's the data and it proves it. And of course it doesn't. And so this is the point of peer review. And this is the point of saying the work you did is great, but I think you need to consider it from this particular angle because that is the more correct interpretation of the information that you have. That is the point of peer review, and that is the role that we as editors-in-chief can play in helping the flow of science.
The one thing that I think that authors get tripped up on, and it's, as Tony says, it's because it's so recent, is registration of clinical trials. IRBs are, pretty ingrained in what we do at this point, so it's pretty unusual to get a paper that doesn't have an IRB correctly applied. And then scientific misconduct is scientific misconduct. People kind of understand when somebody fabricates data or something like that, that's a very, very, very bad thing. But the registration of clinical trials is something that kind of trips authors up a bit. And so we still get papers that say things like, well, this subject was part of the clinical trial before it was registered, and we have to say we're sorry, but we can't put that paper through peer review. And the reason is that it's all about ethicality and transparency. So if you are doing human subjects research in a prospective way before you tell the world about it, then that's an opportunity for bad things happening that the world doesn't know about. And it can be the best trial, for the best purposes, the most innocent mistake. Some coordinator just accidentally put the first patient in before entry into the database, but the fact of the matter is that it was not transparent at that point in time. So we've been, throughout our tenure, we've been very, very strict about that. And so kind of like as a suggestion to authors, if you have an idea that you are going to be conducting a study, enter it into a clinical trial database. It can be any clinical trial database, there are many, but just enter it. It's easier to, if you don't do the trial, pull it, than it is if you enter it after the first subject, because then you really limit the number of publications that you can put this in. And in fact, you're engaging in behavior that's not completely ethical.
And one final point, or our final line of defense, of course, is all of you, our readership. That all of you can go on to Fertility and Sterility Dialogues, and if you feel that there's some issue with the manuscript, please share it. It may be an honest mistake. It may not. We don't know. We're going to, we go through the review process, but it's certainly possible that something could be out there. And if you have an opinion on this, that's the purpose of F&S Dialogues, both positive and negative, to share or to provide insight or background to add to the experience for all those interested in these manuscripts.
Another point I would like to add is cross-check. Because this is something quite new and people are not used to it and get back many surprises. Today, when a manuscript arrives to our office, we can immediately find out whether the authors have copy-paste part of the manuscripts. Sometimes, I would say many times, they copy-paste from their own work, especially the section Material and Methods. But some other times, people take parts from other manuscripts and just copy-paste. And so it's important to realize that we keep an eye on this, and this should be transmitted to the young people who start to write papers, and they should forget about copy-pasting, because it's not a good exercise for scientific publication.
Thanks, everybody. We have an opportunity that we have 5 editors online here, and I've heard a couple times that the peer review process is the most integral in getting a good paper. I've had the privilege of receiving a lot of reviews, and I've read other people's reviews. I've found things that are helpful and not helpful. I'll start the conversation with the most unhelpful review I got was a basic science paper where they sacrificed the mice to see about the gene editing, and the reviewer said, "What do you mean sacrifice? Did you have like a Viking funeral?" That's an unhelpful review. But why don't we hear what kind of stories you have that you think were good or bad reviews so you can help our audience with this?
I would love to start. I think one of the challenges is if you are selected to review and you simply do not have the time, please just say no, and say no quickly so that we can move forward and not waste the time of the person who's waiting to hear back on their manuscript. If you say yes, please review it quickly instead of waiting till the 14th day. And regardless, if you're going to review, please don't submit a review that says, great study, or didn't make sense, I don't understand. These types of reviews aren't helpful to the reviewer. They're not helpful to us. We can't provide any additional feedback. We need specific comments. So it's really important. We love viewers. We benefit from the review. We very much appreciate all the reviewers. But our biggest challenge in trying to make sure to move papers forward for the benefit of both the readership and the individual scientists groups that are working is that the reviews be helpful as far as moving the point forward. And then just one other quick point. The goal of the review really is to improve outcomes rather than trying to nail the paper and harm it. So if you have something positive to say, that's tremendously helpful. Even if you think the study can't be salvaged, at least point out why.
So I just want to throw in, we're looking for reviewers to review our review articles, as strange as that sounds. And one of the wonderful, amazing things is that you may feel a little bit intimidated when you're asked to review a review article because you may have plenty of experience at kind of reviewing scientific articles, but how do you review a review article? Well, the great news is if you choose to review for F&S Reviews, we provide you with some questions to think about and some guidelines and sort of pathways as to how to explore and do this review process. So just want to encourage everybody to consider reviewing for a review article, especially at F&S Reviews, because I think you're going to learn a little bit about conducting reviews. So don't be intimidated and say yes.
So I like to think of the best reviewers as those that almost conduct an independent journal club. So think about when you do journal club as a fellow, you talk about the research question. Is it a good question? Is it well designed? Does it contribute to the literature? What exists already out there in the literature? If this is just one of 100 other studies that say the same thing, it's probably not very novel and may not be worthy of inclusion into this journal. Doesn't mean that there isn't a role for it elsewhere, but what we're really looking for are innovative new papers that drive the field of reproductive medicine forward. The other thing that you want to really look at when I review a paper, I almost universally go straight to the materials and methods first. I mean, background is lovely. It sets the stage for the question, but the meat of the review should really be focused on the materials and methods and then the results section. So do the authors appropriately, do they use the appropriate tools to answer the question that they've set out to ask? And do the results that are reported, are they backed by the data that's presented? And I think that the best papers or the best reviews of papers are really those that focus. Yes, I think it's important to know that there should be a comma on line 14, but I think it's much more important to understand why wasn't a GEE performed to look for lack of independence between cycles from the same woman. And I think that, the best papers and the best reviews are really those that attack the methods and the results and try to properly frame the question that's being asked and to utilize the tools that help to answer those questions.
I'd like to throw in one last point specifically to our reviewers. I think one challenge that a lot of people worry about is whether they're qualified to review the manuscript. Remember, when you read the journal, our hope is that you can understand every single one of the articles, that the articles themselves are clear enough so that you, with your expertise, regardless of if you have any specific expertise in that area, can understand it. So if you get an article and your expertise is in area A and the article's in area B, you're a perfectly fine reviewer. If you can't understand it, then the readership won't be able to understand it either. And we need to know that so that we can get those points across to help the investigators to clarify these points and make it more clear for the readership. We don't want to end up with a bunch of silos of specific knowledge and specific jargon that make it very difficult to understand one article and the next.
So I think what you're hearing is either all of us current or former associate editors exhibiting PTSD from really bad reviews that then basically leave it up to you to review the article. I've also had enough reviews where I felt that I wasn't sure whether the reviewer had actually read the paper or had understood what the endpoint was. For that reason, I actually put a template into the editorial manager reviews for the reviewers to review for F&S reports. And unfortunately, some of the reviewers, I think, are offended by the fact that I have 10 sequential questions that say, just briefly tell me what the primary endpoint was and the secondary endpoint. I think it's important that the author understand that you read it and you got it and you understood exactly what the paper was about. And now when you talk about it and here's your major and minor points, that they are in fact related to the correct paper. And I would expound on what Bill said. Yeah, the review that says great paper, I have no idea what this paper means. Then, of course, there's a review on the other end, where the review is actually longer than the original article. And that is, a very much appreciated. You can tell this was a huge effort, and I feel bad for the author who then has to go through and read 7 or 8 pages of reviews. But that's not necessary. Think to yourself, just like Eve said, was this well designed, and was the conclusion supported by the data? What else should they have looked at, perhaps?
I think a really common theme is that the intent of the peer review process is once the decision has been made that this paper has some value, has something to offer, and should be published in the journal, the entire intent of the peer review process is to make the paper better. And that may take several revisions, but all of that is good. All of that is in the spirit of getting information out that physicians and scientists can use that is valid.
I'll make one other comment here that remember when you review a paper, there are often 2 places to review. One is comments that will be shared to the author, but there's also a place to share comments directly to the editor that are private. So sometimes an author will get reviews back that seem very easy to respond to, but in the comments of the editor is this paper is, not of interest or is not novel, and it might not be reflected in those kind of reviews. So I wanted to say that, and also ask the ask the editors, isn't your job to adjudicate some of that? Don't you sometimes get some angry authors on your hands and say, why isn't my paper in the journal?
Yes.
Always. Always.
We are the most hated people in the society.
Not
because
the
we're
most.
saying no to some of our friends.
I just wanted to add, because some people are reluctant to review manuscripts, but I want to highlight the fact that to review papers for me is an academic duty. So this is something that we must do as people working in universities, in academia, and a perfect training model for the young people.
I was just going to say, if I could throw in one comment for the person who has had their manuscript reviewed, I think sometimes our wording comes across as a little harsh. It sounds like your paper is not acceptable in its current form. And when you read that, your immediate response is, oh no, they hated my paper. That's typically not the case. It's typically trying to get across that we like your paper. It's almost there. Just, work with us on these last few comments, and then we're happy with it. But don't worry about that first sentence, because it can come across as very intimidating.
I learned from Luigi Mastroianni, one of my old mentors, when he was editor in Fertility and Sterility, and he always signed his letters of reject when people were arguing with him as just simply, "You may be right," and leave it at that.
Well, I think if they're totally not interested in the article, they're not going to write much. So it's a compliment when people invest time to put their energy and into review. And so I think people, if you're receiving review and you feel like it's very in-depth and you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling that perhaps they don't like it, I would say no. If they didn't like it, they wouldn't have invested the time. So it's a real honor, actually, for a reviewer to spend that time and give you that feedback.
I just want to chime in here with a comment that I think our reviewers are really the unsung heroes in the review process. I am continuously impressed by the work that is put forth by the reviewers, by the tremendous impact that the reviewers have in making these papers better. And I love seeing the papers that came across my desk that were then subsequently improved through the reviewers and the smart comments that they made. It gives me great pleasure to see those papers in the journal in the final form and in a much better place than they were originally. And I think that the reviewers are blinded, and so they don't get the credit that they deserve. But the heart and soul of this journal is really that review process, and the reviewers who mold and shape those papers into what they are in print, I think is just astounding.
So congratulations to the 3 new editors-in-chief. You're looking to build your journals, both your editorial board and your associate editors and your readership. Tell me what you're looking for and how people can get involved and what you're looking for in somebody that gets involved.
A really good attitude, I think, above all else. The work actually speaks for itself, and I wanted to follow up on what Eve said about the reviewers being the unsung heroes of the editorial process. It is also, to be an ad hoc reviewer, that is, the entry level into the editorial process. And you may find that you're a lot better at it than you thought. And I felt every time I did a review that I learned something from it, not just from the material that was in the article, but also in the thought process that you put into it. And eventually you get better at it. Your reviews will be read very carefully, and your reviews will be judged by the editor-in-chief very carefully. And if you're a good reviewer, you will be asked to join the editorial board. Do not think that you labor in anonymity. I remember many years ago reviewing for Fertility and Sterility. I thought I labored in anonymity. I was always surprised when Roger Kempers would come up to me at the annual cocktail party and said, "I really like your reviews." I assumed he was being polite, but I get it now. People really do read him, and they know who you are. So that's it. Have a good attitude. Be thorough. Do good reviews. You may find you really like it, and you will percolate in this meritocracy of the editorial process. It's really interesting, and it's a really integral, very important component of what we do as scientists moving the field forward.
Let me point out that the purpose of all of our journals is for you, is for the readership, is for the society. That's why we exist. And that's why we've expanded. And that's why we have all of the additional offshoots, including this podcast. The whole point is that we're trying to provide a product that better serves you. So how do we know what the next move is that's going to help you? You tell us. You let us know. You participate in some way. You contact us. You let us know, hey, here's something that I think would really help. So one aspect that we did early on with F&S Science is one aspect, or one point that somebody brought up is, how does my science fit into the great scheme of all the science in reproductive medicine? So what I started asking for is retrospectives of people talking about things that we're all familiar with. How did they come about? What happened? Not just a historical point of the papers that led to it, but what was going on? What were people thinking at those times? And then we have somebody who looks into the future and kind of says, well, if my science were in fact true, how would it change human care and human health? We try to do those things so that it puts each manuscript kind of in a perspective of why it's valuable. But if you find there's something else that would be valuable to you as a readership, please let us know. We are easily accessible. We're very easy to contact. So if you send an email to any one of us, we will all share it if it fits in one or more journals effectively. So please let us know how we can better serve you.
Well, I would just like to say about getting a talk on the subject, which is getting involved in F&S reviews. Of course, our editorial board is a little bit different in the sense that they do, their main purpose is to review these proposals. But of course, like all the other journals, really the pathway to getting involved and with the journal is to submit and then also to do reviews. And by the quality of those reviews, obviously, then leads to further involvement with the journal. So very similar to other things like the other journals, but I just wanted to stress that our editorial board is a little bit different, but I think a fun group to be part of and an incentive to provide good reviews.
I have a question for Craig and Tony. We've talked about all these incredible things that has happened in F&S in your terms as editors-in-chief. The world's first online journal club, the dialogue, 3 new journals, the impact factor going way up. But I'm curious, what did you find was the hardest part or the most challenging part of the job that those of us who are on the outside would never see or never know about? And conversely, what was the most rewarding to you during this time?
So I think the most challenging was saying no to people that we really care about. That they really, everyone has so much passion around their work, which is, and it's part of who we are and what we do. But when someone, say, high up in the society gets very passionate, it's hard to maintain that, no, that we're sorry, but no. That's the most challenge, or it was the most challenging part for me. The most gratifying part is twofold. One is working with incredible people, just incredible people. I mean, it's our field is so much fun because the people who are in it are so creative and brilliant and communicative and really good people. That for me is the big umbrella pleasure. But the personal pleasure is I have a new BFF, and that's Tony Pellicer. Tony and I really didn't know each other before we became co-editors-in-chief, and now he is one of my closest friends in the world. And that is a gift that, I was given by the society that is just extraordinary.
The same here. I mean, when I was told that I may share with somebody else the position as editor-in-chief, I asked, and who is that person? And it turned out that it was an urologist. So I said, no. Last thing I need in my life. But for us, for me, it was fantastic. We became very, very close friends. We met many times in so many places. And for me, what I take home, apart from many enemies that we made rejecting papers, is Craig's friendship, but that will be with me for all my life.
So we're technically out of time. Anybody want to say anything before they go?
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Micah. Thank you, Eve. It's been fantastic. Really appreciate all that you do for all of us. Thank you so much.
I'll echo those thanks. This is just a really wonderful group of people, and it's a pleasure to work with you all.
I really appreciate that. We'll see what we can whittle this one down into, get rid of my breathing, and make us all sound intelligent. Thank you all.
Thanks again. That was great.
Good seeing everyone.
This concludes our episode of Fertility and Sterility on Air, brought to you by Fertility and Sterility in conjunction with the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. This episode was produced by Dr. Michael Simoni and Dr. Jeffrey Hayes. This podcast was developed by Fertility and Sterility and the American Society for Reproductive Medicine as an educational resource and service to its members and other practicing clinicians. While the podcast reflects the views of the authors and the hosts, it is not intended to be the only approved standard of practice or to direct an exclusive course of treatment. The opinions expressed are those of the discussants and do not reflect Fertility and Sterility or the American Society for Reproductive Medicine.